Hey everybody, this is Ted from Bicknell Racing Products with another Tech Tip Tuesday. Today we're going to discuss shock and spring angles and why they are important and why what effect they have on the cars. The first thing we're just going to discuss is the location of the bird cage itself. We always give a dimension from the outside of the bell to the inside of the bird cage. What that is going to do is set the location from the wheel. So the reason that the bird cage placement is important is it affects the ratio between how much the wheel moves and how much the spring moves. So if the wheel moves 1 inch, the spring might only move 3/4 of an inch. The closer or further away that bird cage is from the wheel, the more that ratio changes. Also, the position of the bird cage is important because the closer the spring and shock is to the wheel, the faster the shock moves. So the shock valving is super important, or a lot of it is based on the position of the bird cage. So valving of your shocks is super important as well. So another thing to consider is shock angle. So once we have our bird cage in the proper location, the angle of the shock is also super important. So Tim kind of touched on this the last segment with our on setup stands. He discussed the angle of shocks and getting the proper angle. So why that's important is the spring rate and the shock valving are also dependent on the angle of that spring and shock combination. So if you have a 200-pound spring, if your angle of your shock is 0, your spring rate is 200 pounds. If you have 10 degrees of angle, you only have 98% of your effective rate. At 15 degrees, you only have 96%, etc. So the more angle you put into a shock or spring, the softer the spring will get. So there is no right or wrong answer on shock angle or spring angle, any of that kind of stuff. All of our baseline setup sheets are based on a certain angle and a certain bird cage position. So if you don't have the same setup as your neighbor has, if you have to run a stiffer spring than he does, possibly that your shock angle is actually what is causing this. So if your car is good and you are comfortable with the setup that you have, by all means don't change it. But if you're struggling and you can't figure out why you don't have as much grip as somebody else has with the same spring combination, then we should maybe start to investigate what your shock angles are and where your bird cages are, and maybe that will give us some clues as to why your car doesn't perform the same as somebody else's.